Absolutely. Sure. Well, thank you, Megs. And thanks everyone for taking the time to join today. We appreciate you joining for today's important discussion. My name is Daryl Kay, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer at Agriculture Financial Services. We are extremely proud to support this event and support the important work that the Do More Agriculture Foundation is committed to. I have the great pleasure of introducing today's panelists who have graciously agreed to share their own experiences as producers navigating the many stresses and unknowns that this industry can present. So I'd like to start by introducing Amy Vanderhyde, who's a farmer in the Annapolis Valley, raising kids, chickens, cattle, and crops. Next, welcome to Lindsay here, a flower farmer, advocate, dairy and beef producer, chicken enthusiast, and mom to 4 amazing girls. Together, they farm in northern BC. And finally, welcome to Kyle Stewart, a rancher and former bull rider using life experiences to advocate for mental health in agriculture. So today, in honor of Canada's Agriculture Day, Megs and the panel will share their stories to help normalize the conversation and break down the stigma surrounding mental health. This is something that we at AFSC believe in and strongly support. Farming and ranching is incredibly demanding and stressful. We understand that amongst everything else, mental health and wellness is not always a top priority. It doesn't always come easy or necessarily feel natural to talk about. So whenever possible, we welcome the opportunity to emphasize the importance of mental wellness and highlight resources and strategies that our own people, clients, and community members can use to take care of their own mental health. So with that, I'm excited to hand things back over to Megs, and we can get right into the panel conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daryl, and thank you for the continued support. AFSC is an important partner of ours, so thank you. My name is Megs Reynolds. I am the Executive Director of the Do More Agriculture Foundation, and I used to be a grain farmer in Southwest Saskatchewan. And in 2018, I testified to the Agriculture Agri-Food Standing Committee that at that point, after about 3 hard years with weather and commodity prices not cooperating, that I felt like I was digging my own grave to follow my dreams, and that I felt like a failure. I felt like a failure as a farmer. I attached my sense of self-worth to my ability to be successful on farm, and I felt like I had failed as a spouse and as a partner, and as a mother. And so while I was not actively considering suicide, I did for a period of my life feel like my only worth to my family was in my life insurance policy. So agriculture is hard. We all know that. My connection to mental health and agriculture is very real from my lived experiences. And I'm really excited to be here today with all of you. Sticking with today's theme, since I've already mentioned I'm no longer grain farming, this is the boot I'm going to show you today. I'm actually in Halifax, and I spoke this morning at a conference. So my boots have changed a little over the last 4 years. But yeah, thank you all for joining us. I'm going to hand things over now to Amy to introduce herself and show her boot.
Thanks, Megs. As Megs mentioned, or Daryl actually, I am a poultry farmer, cattle farmer, crop farmer, and a mother to 3 boys. So lots going on, but I'm at the same conference Megs is today, but those are my boots, my everyday, carry me around wherever I go, Blundstones, they never fail you.
Thanks, Amy. Lindsay, over to you.
Thanks so much. So I'm Lindsay. I live in northern British Columbia, and this is my boot that I am wearing today. It is colder, and I will be pressure washing in the barn when we're done here. So the Dunlops are my go-to. But yes, I'm a flower farmer and a dairy and beef producer up here in northern BC.
Thanks, Lindsay. And Kyle, show us your boot.
Yeah, my name is Kyle Stewart. I'm a cattle producer from Southwest Saskatchewan. I ranch with my wife and our 3 girls and my wife's parents. I'm also at a conference in Saskatoon, but I stuck with Old Faithful Ariettes. That's my kind of story to start.
Nice, thank you. Ariettes used to be my cowboy boot of choice, and I often wore them in the tractor and combine. before we get into kind of the more fulsome conversation, I just want to let everybody know that none of us are mental health professionals, and that, you know, with what we're talking about today, there may be things that some of us say that make you feel uncomfortable or make you think of a time in your life that maybe you struggled and maybe you're not comfortable just being present for that conversation anymore. So I just want to make sure that you all know your priority is your mental well-being. And if that means leaving partway through, please take care of yourself. I also want this to be as organic as possible. So please, if you have questions or comments, throw them in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and just ask. And if you are curious about something and you're not comfortable sharing or asking a question, feel free to message me directly and I can bring it up in the chat. That I find works really great as a tool to share, but be anonymous in that sharing. So if this is also being recorded, just, you know, so feel free to keep your camera off, change your name, what have you. And yeah, thank you all for being here. So we've done that first round of introductions. I'm gonna start with a little bit of setting the stage with where we're at in mental health in Canadian agriculture. And there's been different studies done by the University of Guelph. I'm going to cite their most recent one, which was completed in 2021. So obviously the pandemic is influencing this, but what they found in 2021 was that 1 in 4 Canadian producers felt like their life was not worth living, wished that they were dead, or had thought about taking their own life in the last 12 months. So we're overall as an industry, we're not in a great place when it comes to mental health. And that's really hard for me anyways, I get emotional thinking about it, to know that that's where we're at when you start thinking about your family members, your friends, your community members. What they also found was that 83% of Canadian producers had lower resiliency scores than the general US population. And that maybe seems a little surprising because we are an industry that prides ourselves on our resilience and our ability to take hits that we can't control and to get back up. And I mean, what do we always say? There's always next year, right? So do it again. But for me, that really speaks to just where we're at with mental health, and our resiliency comes from our mental health and comes from having our mental wellness in a place that really allows us to go through those things or strategically address something. So with all of that kind of said, I'd love now to just open the floor. Kyle, maybe I'll start with you, but just share your connection. And again, do it in a way with what you're comfortable sharing, but your connection to mental health and why it's important for you to be joining us today and having this conversation.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks. So for mental health, for me, it started in, like, the importance of it started when I was 19. At that time, I had made the decision to stop riding bulls because of too many concussions, and then kind of learning to deal with the effects of post-concussion syndrome, memory loss and mood swings, and, you know, loss of vocabulary in conversations and that sort of thing. And then in 2017, I lost a friend of mine to suicide. And that kind of brought everything back up that I had been dealing with. And then from 2018 to 22, my wife and I had some loss in our families, and it was, you know, sudden and unpredictable. And then you add the general struggles of everyday ranching on top of all that, and it really, you know, made it important to focus on for us. You know, and it wasn't until a really good friend of mine opened up about his mental health struggles that I, you know, felt okay about talking to someone about it. And this person who opened up to me about it was someone who I idolized as being, you know, a real genuine person who had accomplished many great things. And I thought, geez, if he's facing that, you know, looking in from the outside, he looks like the perfect picture of a person. But you never know what anyone's dealing with. So for me, it was important to start talking to people, friends, peers about it. And the more you talk to people about it, you know, everyday friends or, you know, industry people, the more common it is that everyone has their own struggles. And so the more we can shed light on it being I don't know if normal is the right word, but I think it'll help everyone feel like they're not alone when they are getting in a tough spot.
You touched on such an important piece, and that's that stigma piece, right? And how it really took someone in your circle that you looked up to and respected, them putting themselves in a vulnerable position and talking about stuff for you to kind of think like, oh, this is something I can do. And when we talk about stigma for me is not just like there's not just kind of one piece to it. There's that external stigma, which keeps us from maybe booking an appointment at the local mental health professional's office because we're worried that, you know, I don't want someone to drive by and see my truck out front and then they know my business and they know what I'm going through, or that I'm needing help and I feel maybe weak or less than, or because of that. And then there's the internal stigma, which can sometimes be harder. And that's the piece that says, or that stops me personally from being able to, one, acknowledge that something's going on, like catching those flags and being able to acknowledge that I need to reach out for help, and two, accept that. And that acknowledgement piece and that acceptance piece are different. They're not connected. And the acceptance, I would say, is harder often. And where I've seen big strides in agriculture, which is exciting, is that external stigma. You know, we're here together on Canada's Ag Day, we're having this conversation, but then, you know, when I'm out and about talking to producers, often someone will say, I'm so glad we're having the conversation. I totally support someone else to talk to someone if they need it, but I would never need to do that, right? And that's that internal stigma piece. And it's so incredibly powerful when people share their stories. And like you said, and Kyle, you being here sharing, you're able to connect to people that I'm not necessarily able to connect to. And it's just because we're looking for people we see ourselves in, right? Like your story is such a prime example of that. So yeah, thank you. Lindsay, can you talk to us about kind of your connection and why it was important today to be here having the conversation?
Yeah, sure. So I guess mental health does mean a lot to me. Yes, I have lost people in my life to suicide. And just, I think, loss in general, as you get older and you start to go through things or experience things in life that, you know, are just tough. I think it's really important that we talk about it. And so I guess for myself, I started to, on my third pregnancy, so I have 4 girls, and during my third pregnancy, I started to, I guess, develop, well, depression, and I would say postpartum, but I was still pregnant. And during that pregnancy, it was the only baby that I found out with if I was going to have a boy or girl. And I remember walking around with my 2 daughters in the grocery store and people saying to me constantly, like, oh, are you having a boy? Are you so you know, like, oh, are you hoping it's a boy? And I remember just feeling so actually ashamed that I knew I was having another daughter because of the constant pressure, I guess, to have a boy, because we have this farm and you need to have a boy to continue on the farm. And it became this thing where I almost actually didn't even want to go out anymore. And when my daughter was born, I did go into a depression, and not just because of that, but I just remember feeling all this pressure to have this certain family or have things look a certain way. And my husband never once put any of that on me, but it was constantly like, oh, you must, you know, when are you trying for another one? And so after my daughter was born, and we have, you know, 4 healthy, awesome daughters, I actually had an accident and a cow ran me over, and I got a concussion from that. And then I fell into like a pretty dark depression where I was scared to basically leave the house. Driving to town, I was scared I would go off the road. I was scared to go into the barn. I was scared of cows. It just kind of became this thing. And then but I felt like I kind of always was managing it, I guess. And then when I unexpectedly got pregnant with my 4th daughter, the depression kind of doubled down, and I felt like it was sort of like do or die. Like either I get help now or I don't know how to continue on because I'm going to have these 4 little people that need me. And so then I actually did seek out help. I went and found a good professional, and I started antidepressants after my daughter was born. And for me, I know there's a lot of, again, shame and stigma around medication. But for me, I felt like, and I said to my doctor, I don't know if it's in my head, but I feel like a cloak of prickles has just been lifted off of me. I didn't feel like I was sad, but I felt like I was angry all the time, and angry at my kids, angry outside, like just mad. And I felt like once I started my antidepressants, yeah, I just felt like 1,000 pounds lifted off my shoulders. And that's not to say that some days aren't still hard or that I still get sad, I still get emotional, but I just feel like I'm my old self again. And so it took a lot of like going down into that before I finally sought help. And I do think that if there wasn't the stigma or the pressure, I probably would have done that sooner. And now I'm very proud that I have 4 girls, and the comments don't come so often anymore. And when they do, I can just, shrug it off. But that's kind of where I come from. And so I just think it's so important that we encourage each other to get help, and that when we know something is wrong or we're just not doing well, that we seek out help and there's so many forms of help too. Like you don't necessarily need medication, but yeah, there's so many different things that is out there that can help.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think like a good thing, like your last comment on like there's different things out there for help, and I don't think we always know what we need either, right? Like we're all learning about, especially mental health. I didn't grow up on a farm, but I still didn't grow up talking about it or learning about it or learning about, how to have conversations or any of those pieces. And what we all need, especially if we're going through something, is different. And that's when, reaching out for help, which is incredibly challenging, but that dealing with someone who is a professional, they can help work with you to figure out what does that look like? Like, what does that help look like? And I'm so glad, Lindsay, like that you were able to reach out and that you're at a place, where you're at now. And thank you for sharing. Because again, it's through being open about this stuff that we start normalizing. It's honestly one conversation at a time, and there's so much power in that. Amy, I'm gonna let you share your connection and to mental health and why it's important for you to be here today.
Sure. So like many people probably on this webinar and people we know, I grew up with someone who struggled with their mental health, and that kind of I guess stuck with me going into adulthood and the challenges that come with that. So that after I had my 3rd child in 2014, I, like Lindsay, noticed that I wasn't happy. I wasn't myself. It was January when I finally sought help for this, but it was very much like that cloak, exactly like she said. It clicked with me so well that I finally was like, okay, I need to go see my doctor because I can't live like this. I can't be angry at my children and my husband and the farm and just everything. So I think growing up with some of that firsthand knowledge helped clue that in to me a little bit sooner than it might have if I didn't have that experience. But after talking to my doctor and talking out, like we went way back, like through the years when I had felt similar or whatever, and I was diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder. And every year now, because it happens in August, I start to get really down or just really tired and can't sleep and all that stuff. I do take medication now for it, and I take it year round because it can start in August, it can start in September, it could end in March, it could end in May. There's no timeline. So I do rely on those year round. And I think that talking to someone, I had my support group, my friends who, we're all having children at the same time I was, who were all farmers like me. And really picking up on, okay, what's different about what I'm experiencing? We're all stressed. We all have little kids. That's part of the game. But what is this extra that's really sticking with me? And having them around and able to talk to was really key to having that support to be able to pick up the phone and call the doctor. So yeah, it's a whirlwind, because I did grow up seeing the effects of mental illness. But the benefit of that was that maybe I could cope a little bit better when I faced my own point of crisis.
So were you able to identify then that you were maybe at a place where you needed to reach out for help, or was that your friends or people in your life saying, hey, Amy, we've noticed these things, are you okay, we're checking in?
I think it was a combination. I had a huge struggle with insomnia. So that for me, I mean, it's terrible if you've ever experienced it. But then people were like, just checking in, you seemed really quiet the other day, or is everything okay? You just seemed a little off. Knowing that I had those friendships that were close enough to be able to call me out on that. But also just being like, okay, I cannot go through another week with 3 or 4 hours sleep a day if I was lucky. So it's kind of a combination of both, of knowing that I can be quiet and suffer through, or have somebody to kind of stick up for me and say, we've noticed this and we're worried about you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so important. And it can be, one of the things I said this morning when I was speaking was, it can feel awkward, right? We're used to doing that surface level of like, how's it going? I'm good, I'm fine, whatever. So it can feel a little awkward to either ask someone directly because you're really concerned, like, hey, are you okay? Or to have someone ask you that and actually get into it. But my experience, and I like Amy, I think what you're speaking to is like, once you have that safety net and once you've kind of gotten past that initial feeling, that it gets a lot easier, and then you feel a lot better for being able to do that. Kyle, how would you, I know we've spoken outside of this, and you've been, with friends, that's been something you've done where you see them go through something, and we're talking about mental health and we're talking about mental illness, and there's different pieces. And one of the things that I want to stress is that we might not all be diagnosed with a mental illness at some point in our life, but we will be around people who have been, or we will go through an emotional shock or a change. It could be a life change. It could be loss and grief. It could be a traumatic event like the hurricane out east last summer, or the flooding over a year ago in BC. So there's these different parts, and maybe for that, as we go through that, having professional help helps us, right? And teaches us some tools to do that. So Kyle, when you've reached out to someone in the past because they've gone through kind of that life event where they've had loss or they've had something happen, how have you gone about just initiating that conversation with them?
Yeah, I think first off, it's as simple as saying how you doing, and if you don't believe them, asking again, and that maybe gives them a sense they can actually tell you. And kind of like you had alluded to there, you see someone go through something that you have in the past, and you maybe see a few signs from your own experience that you can see in that person. And there's one instance there where that had happened, and I just wanted to make sure they kind of had the basics, because that's something you forget about when you're at your lowest or your darkest. Try and keep on your schedule, get a schedule down. The more you can do, for instance, something I find really helped me was in the morning, I get ready the exact same way every morning. I cook the same meal for breakfast. I pour my coffee the same time. And that was because I read an article that you can only make so many good decisions in a day. And it was talking about doctors. And when they work a long shift, as they get farther into their shift, their decision-making skills go down. So I tried to apply that to myself and say the less that just comes natural in the morning, and I get out the door and go outside. I didn't have to make a decision until I got outside, because everything happened in a routine. And so, that was one thing I shared with this friend of mine. I said, just, keep things simple and try and just, go back to basics and, make sure you're looking after yourself, eat properly, stay hydrated. Things get hard. You kind of miss those things when you're under a lot of stress. And, if you can, it's like a lot of things. If you can go back to basics, things get easier and simpler and they slow down and you're able to process better. So, I mean, that's probably my advice to when I see someone going through something where I maybe see signs of them struggling, and then it kind of depends after that more individually. But I think that's a great starting point.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate the comments around like routine or what decisions can you kind of take off your plate for a little while and allow yourself to, yeah, maybe create space for or capacity for other things. Lindsay, how would you did you have any friends that reached out to you because they noticed you withdrawing? And you, kind of what was that helpful or was that hard initially for you to have that conversation?
Yeah, I would say actually my sister was probably the biggest influence in that, because she has a lot of health struggles, and so she has had a lot of physical health and mental health struggles. And she mentioned to me more than once, like, do you think that maybe things are, like, yes, you're stressed, or, but I think we're like a little bit further down the line, like, we are a little bit past kind of the general handling it yourself level, let's call it, I guess. So she was probably my biggest encourager to go and talk to somebody and to get help. And also I think having that like completely, I guess, just non-judgmental, influence, I guess. So yeah, her support was huge. And then I was just going to add on to what Kyle said too, about when you're worrying about somebody, I think too that it's okay to outright ask them if they are thinking about hurting themselves or if they have those thoughts. And when you just get really direct, because sometimes, and the other part of that too is that when people share or tell you, then we have to believe them. That, you can't, if somebody shares something that is hard to hear, or maybe more than you were anticipating, that I think our knee-jerk reaction sometimes is like, it'll be okay, you'll be fine, but sometimes you have to sit in that hard stuff. And also sometimes acknowledge when it is kind of above our pay grade, and it's our job, I think, to then go and get some intervention.
Yes to everything you just said. Thank you for talking about like being able to ask someone if you're worried about them hurting themselves, like, are you thinking of suicide? It's such an important thing to ask. And I know that we can shy away from the hard. And there's a campaign, I think it's in Australia, and it's called Soften the like F Up, but it's basically like trying to get men to, and people who are very stoic by nature, but to have some of these harder conversations and to soften up to do it. So yeah, if you see something, and yeah, we don't need to be a mental health professional to have a conversation with someone, especially if we're worried about them. There was an incredible thread on Twitter this summer, and it was an agronomist, I believe, who showed up on farm, and she could tell that the farmer wasn't doing well. And she was able to, say, hey, I've noticed this since I've been here. Are you okay? And the farmer said, no, I'm not. And she, understanding that one, she can't fix it, and two, it's, as you said, Lindsay, above her pay grade. That's not her training. She said, can we call a support line? Can we call a crisis line together? And the farmer was comfortable with that. And so she made the call and got the farmer connected, and then was able to remove herself so that could be a private conversation. But there's a really good chance that she saved that farmer's life by just saying, hey, can I help connect you to someone that can help have that conversation and help support you right now? So don't be afraid to lean on the resources that are out there. And then you just, honestly, you hit on so many important touch points, but when someone is sharing with us, that takes vulnerability. And so it's really important that we're, one, actively listening, meaning when they're talking, we're not formulating our response to them. We're listening to what they're saying. We're being curious. We're asking open-ended questions. We want to keep that conversation going, keep that person sharing with us, and then validating what they're telling you and is their truth. What they're feeling is their truth. Again, your points, Lindsay. So, and then having empathy. And sometimes that's just feeling with that person and saying, I'm so sorry that that's how you feel or that you're going through this. I'm here. Again, we don't have to fix. Don't say at least. I think we've been hardwired to say that too. And I used to do this, like all of these things we do with others, we need to talk to ourselves the same way, but there's, you're always going to be able to find somebody that is going through something that's harder than what you're going through. And that doesn't take away from what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. It's important to just give yourself grace and space to process. Like when we say, oh, there's always next year, I get that we need to be kind of eternal optimists to exist in this industry, but at the same time, we're almost shutting down the how we're able to just to live in that feeling for a little while. And maybe that's grief, and maybe there's a process to work through it, but just not shoving it down. Amy, is there any advice that you would give for starting the conversation with someone, or trying to find a time to engage with someone?
I think it depends on the situation, but really it's kind of that, I think it was Kyle that said, if you see something, say something, really. I have had, since sharing my story, people reach out to me and say, that sounds really similar to me. Do you mind chatting? So sometimes it's even just, if someone knows what your history is, that gives them permission to share what's happening in their lives. But if it's someone that you love and care about, or know that this isn't them, it's kind of that, find a quiet moment and just say, how you doing? Is there anything you want to chat about? Or I've noticed this. And it also depends on the person, how that's received, because some people can be defensive. They have that shield up. They don't want to talk about it, even though it may be obvious to other people. So it's kind of the pick your moment roulette, I guess you could say, depending on who it is. But I think no matter when it happens, it's just important that you do take the time to either step aside or let them know. And if they are defensive at first, sometimes that's the door. And a couple of days later, they come back around to say, there was something going on, and if you have a chance, I'd love to talk to you now. So it really does depend on the situation, but just getting it out there, so at least they know that someone's watching and someone's there for them, even if they aren't receptive to it right away. It's still really important.
Yeah, and it might take, especially with someone who comes across defensive, it might take a couple of times of just constantly bringing, I've noticed this, how are you doing? Are you okay? Do you want to have a conversation before they're able to or comfortable to engage with you on that? Lindsay, how would you, I just had a train of thought and it flew away. Do you, so in your day-to-day, especially with kind of what you've learned through your own lived experience, do you check in on people that, do you wait for warning signs or for flags, or are you kind of with your family and with your crew checking on people that maybe even are not outwardly showing signs that something's going on?
I guess it depends on, yes and no. It depends probably more on my relationship, but I know I do find that I think I'm a fairly intuitive person, and that I often kind of can pick up on things maybe before other people can, or I see things that sometimes others don't. And I don't know if I'm just hyper aware because of what I have been through. But yeah, if I notice something, I definitely try to say something. And I did have a friend recently who is going through a really hard time and did something pretty out of character, that to me was just like a huge, like, whoa, wait a second. And I did ask some, I guess, awkward questions, probably for him, because I don't think that he's talked to in that way that often, really directly, and just saying like, are you okay? Are you, and having those conversations. And but it can be tricky. Like, I don't want to say it's the easiest thing in the world, because it's not. It's sensitive and it can be really tough. But I do try to check in with people, but I also know that we only have so much capacity as well, right? And so we can't, I don't know, take everybody's struggles on. So it is a bit of a balancing act.
For sure. Supporting within your means is a real thing. And sometimes it can feel selfish, especially if it's like a spouse or a child or, loved one, to put yourself first and your mental health first. But at the end of the day, you only have, if I keep pouring out of this cup of water and I'm never putting more water in, I'm going to run out of water to pour. And we're the same way. If we're continually supporting and taking in feeling and different things, if we're not doing something to recharge us, we're going to burn out. We're going to hit the wall. Kyle, what would be, this is transitioning into, I'm going to call it self-maintenance. I'm not going to say self-care, because that might be too fluffy for some people, but what are things that you do as self-maintenance to take care of your day-to-day mental wellness?
I mean, I think it's super important that as producers, we have a hobby or something we enjoy, that's not directly related to what we do every day. I mean, for me, during the wintertime, I like to do some leather work, which I find just totally takes your mind somewhere else. Or, in the summertime, or, spring, summer, fall, occasionally in the wintertime. I mean, we do everything on horses as far as moving cows. I mean, that's probably the most, ground earth thing to do for us. I mean, that we all feel better after that. But and I kind of said this before too, about having a system and being organized. I mean, if you plan your days out, I find if you plan your days out before, I mean, that's less you put on yourself that morning. When you get outside, you're like, what am I gonna do today? If you already know what you're doing, I mean, that takes a lot off you, and it gives you more capacity to deal with whatever you're going to deal with that day. Another thing I do, I mean, I carry a book around in my pocket every day that my memory sucks so bad. I write everything down. I mean, I got a day planner in there. I got my cabin book in there. I mean, that is so important to me. And I find it helps so much. And I believe it helps with sleeping habits too. When you got something on your mind, you can write it down and get it off your mind. I mean, I don't have a problem sleeping, luckily. I've never had a problem sleeping. I'm a really good sleeper. But I feel that can spiral out of control, like kind of Amy was talking about, you start losing sleep, and then it's harder and harder and harder to fall asleep. And I mean, one thing I read, if you can write stuff down as soon as something's bothering you, or as soon as you know you got to do something, write it down, get it off your mind, and that can put your mind at ease. So I think trying to just keep your mind clear and talk about or write down the things that are bothering you, just to get it out there. And I mean, after you write it down and you look, if you took a problem you had and you wrote it down and you read it back to yourself, it generally doesn't sound as bad when you read it back to yourself compared to how it sounded in your head. And I feel that's really important too.
Yeah, I really like that. And I actually, on the plane ride down, I'm reading a book on mental toughness. People can see that. But where I was at speaks about even just stress, like naming your stress. And once you do that, it shifts the part of the brain that's focusing on it. So it becomes less overwhelming and more of a positive of like, okay, this is what I got to do. How am I going to do this? And then you can kind of go about it and tackle it. And I'm going to expand on the self-maintenance a little bit as well, with just for anyone on the call that's still thinking that I don't know if this is something I need to do. And Kyle, I loved your comment about having hobbies, because farming can be so all-consuming. With you're working with your family, you're living where you work, there's always a never-ending list of things that need to be done. So how do you have yeah, create a hobby that you get to do, you can do it on farm maybe, but that allows you to just disconnect from all of that that's maybe sitting on you. And I love that. So self-maintenance, think of it, if you're still struggling with this concept, think of it the same as taking care of equipment. So I used to grain farm. There's no way we would go into seeding or harvest without first getting that equipment out in the off season, going through it, making sure that the fluids were changed. If there's a belt that looks like it's gonna go, change that before you get into the field. Bearing, all of those pieces, right? We need to think of ourselves the same way, and then look at the seasonality of our operation. So on a day-to-day, week to week, month to month, what demands are on us that could be, affecting our mental wellness, our day-to-day battery, are going to change. So maybe before you get into that busy season, Kyle, for you that could be calving, what can you do to best prepare yourself, your mental wellness, to go into that season knowing you're going to get less sleep, and you're going to maybe have a little more stress, and there's going to be these things that are happening that are affecting more than normal your day-to-day. So just think of it that way for anyone that's just a little itchy about the whole self-maintenance thing. It's no different than taking care of your equipment. Amy, what are things that you do to like for that self-maintenance piece?
I'm a lot like Kyle in that I stick to a routine. I have the same thing for breakfast every day. I go to bed at the same time every day. My day is mapped out every day as much as possible on a farm. So that pretty much means there's a spot at some point in the day that something's going to go wrong and I have to jump in. But just knowing that and preparing myself for that is huge for me. And because my sleep is the first thing that goes when I'm stressed at all, that routine is so important, because my body knows, okay, it's this time I need to eat, then I'll feel better. This time I need to sleep. That's what my body needs. It's a self-recognition that I've come to realize that I can't just go 24/7 and catch up when it's not as busy. But also things like I love to read. So that's my escape from the farm. We have a busy season, but because we're broiler farmers, it's all year round too. So I read to escape. I have 3 kids who are in activities. So when we're at a basketball game, I'm 100% at that basketball game. If, there's a call or whatever that comes in at that time, if it's not an emergency, it gets left at the door. So just little things like that, like knowing when to, leave that stress at the door and be there in the present moment is also, it's hard to learn and it's hard to recognize, but it's really important.
Yeah, I like that. And I think I was listening to a crime podcast or something, and they were talking to one of the detectives, and they said, you deal with like horrible things in your day-to-day work. How do you leave that at work and then transition to home? And they had a token that they would carry with them. And so when they would be walking out the door in the morning, they would grab that token, put it in their pocket. And that was a physical way for them to mentally switch gears. And I like that, because it can be very, very hard to, especially again, when you're living and working and it's all taking place in the same space. Lindsay, what are some ways that you recharge and take care of your self-maintenance?
Yeah, one of the things that I do is, I guess I try to prioritize or compartmentalize, but I used to be very unrealistic about like, yes, I'll get that done, and then I'll get this done, and then I'll go here, and then I'll get that done. And so I try really hard to prioritize and kind of map out my time to say, like, yes, this is a priority, but I do not have time, and I will get that done tomorrow between this time. That's been a really big game changer. Otherwise, I always just felt like I had all this stuff piled up. And so that to me is kind of a way, I guess, I don't know if I'm visualizing it, but kind of like lowering the stack to do out of a longer space. And of course, emergencies come up again, with kids and cows, things happen all the time, and giving yourself grace that, yes, like the main things, everybody is healthy and alive, and we got the main stuff done we needed to, and tomorrow we'll tackle that. So I think kind of being realistic about my time and what I can accomplish has helped a lot. The other thing is that I'm really fortunate that I can take time away from the farm. I'm involved in a provincial organization that takes me out of town every 2 or 3 months. And that for me is huge to recharge and just have a bit of a breather from the farm, time alone, makes me really appreciate what I have, reminds me that there is life outside of the day-to-day craziness that is the farm and the world of, production. And then the other thing I do too is that I have some spiritual practices that I do that I follow. Nothing crazy, but just things about like gratitude, prayers, things like that, that just kind of help ground me. Yeah, and really recharge me in that way. So those are kind of my top 3 things.
Yeah, I love those. Thanks for sharing. One of the things that is important for me is exercise. That could be going for a walk on lunch so that I physically disconnect from my computer. It could be going for a run or having a workout in my basement, but that's always been something that I go to. And another one for me, if I'm feeling overwhelmed, is creating a list. I'm a list person. I know that doesn't work for everybody, but and then just crossing off things, because there's always things out of our control, especially in agriculture. And so if I can just write everything down that's keeping me up at night or that's like physically sitting on my shoulders, and then just cross the stuff off that I can't personally control, that there's no part of me that can control that outcome or that thing. And then just trying to like allow that activity to just take that off my shoulders and then just focus on the things that are within my control. And then to your point, Lindsay, being realistic about what does that look like? I can't do everything all at once. And I personally really struggle with the term work-life balance because I think it creates unreal expectations, especially in agriculture. And so it's then again, like, what can I do right now? And what balls can I keep in the air? Or what balls do I have to keep in the air? What can I temporarily set down? What can I maybe lend to someone for a week or two and like get their help, in that family setting? I have one thing that came up in the chat that I wanted to touch on, and it says, don't forget the physical side effects of like stress and holding everything in. And that, yeah, thank you, Wendy, for saying that. That's such an important piece because mental health is directly linked to our health, like overall health. And if we're not creating a healthy outlet to deal with those feelings, that stress and anxiety, what have you, it needs to go somewhere and our body is going to do something with it. I went through a period of my life where after a bunch of testing, I realized that I get stomach migraines. I didn't even know that was a thing, but that when I wasn't dealing with finding a healthy way to relieve that stress, that my body just like needed to do something with it. And I would just get a lot of pain. One of the things that I do in my day-to-day is I check in. I'm even doing it now. Like I put my shoulders up by my ears. Some of us clench our jaws. So just being, check in with yourself a couple times a day physically. How are you doing? Are you holding stress? Where are you holding stress? How can you release that? A really great way if you are feeling overwhelmed or you're wanting to kind of regulate your nervous system, and this is something I do with my kids, is called box breathing. So it's taking like a long, deep inhale where you're like, you can actually see your stomach move out because you're breathing into your diaphragm, doing that for 4 seconds, holding that breath for 4 seconds, and then doing a slow exhale out for 4 seconds and holding that. And that will really help your nervous system. So maybe that you're about to have a phone call or a conversation, or you're working on the books and things are not, where you'd ideally like them to be. Bringing that practice in to just help your system and help regulate that stress that you have. We have a couple minutes left. So I want to see if, I can keep talking, but I want to see if anyone has questions. And like that could be from, like I said, if you want to directly send me something, feel free to do that, that I can ask or that I can just share with the group. And also like Lindsay, Amy, Kyle, if you guys have questions for each other or for me, jump in. I'm also going to share my email in the chat. So for anyone looking for more information on Do More or wanting to reach out to me directly, please feel free to do so. If you are looking for resources, we've worked, as in Do More, really hard to bring them all into one place. It can be, because mental health is provincial, it falls under provincial health directives. What every province has is different, especially when it comes to mental health support in agriculture. So there might be pretty specialized support systems in place with a specific agriculture support line and some free counseling in some provinces. Other provinces won't have that. So we've really tried to bring all of that information into one place. So our website, we have a resource page. We also have a page that is just full of like blog posts and other different educational pieces. So you can search there. Maybe you are starting to think about calling or booking an appointment with a professional, and you're worried about what that's going to be like. You can search that and it'll bring up a blog post or tips on reducing stress. There's all sorts of stuff. So please use the website as a resource. And ultimately, talking to anyone is better than not talking to anyone. So if you're not comfortable reaching out to a professional, reach out to someone you are comfortable reaching out to, because ultimately that conversation is important. And if you are worried about, like, if someone's communicated to you that they're intending to hurt themselves or someone else, or that they are at a place where they're having suicidal thoughts, 911 is your best option. You can also send just someone out to check on someone else. Maybe you're not in the same community and you can't drive down the road to physically check in on that person. You can get a police officer to perform a wellness check on your behalf. No questions? I will also put the name of the book in the chat in case anyone's curious. Well, if there's no questions or final comments, I guess we'll do a quick round before we'll go. What is one thing you wish that you knew prior to your own personal journey with mental health and talking about and being open about stuff? If you could leave everyone in this room with one thing, what would that be? Let's start with you, Kyle.
Sorry, I was muted. I just heard this today and it made a lot of sense. The 80-20 rule. Nothing's ever going to be perfect, but if it's 80% good, then that's probably as good as it's going to go when you need to focus on the 80%.
I like that. And I think that holds a lot of weight in agriculture, where things are often not according to plan or perfect. Amy?
It's kind of a loaded question, but I think for me, really important, in addressing my mental wellness or those around me, is to find something positive every day, because you can be so drained down at times, whether it's because of life in general, or it's calving season, or it's cropping season, or there's a disease outbreak or whatever. When you look back on your day, try to find something positive to take out of it, because otherwise it just sinks you down so fast.
That is such a good point. It's very easy just to kind of get tunnel vision on the negative or what is stressful or hard. Lindsay?
Yeah, I guess for me personally, I wish I knew what a difference medication would make. That sometimes all of the self-care and self-awareness and therapy, when you have a condition, sometimes only can go so far. And when I actually took that step, it was like the clouds parted and the sun came out again. And I wish I didn't wait so long.
That's so important. Thank you. And I want to say a massive thank you to Kyle, Amy, and Lindsay. I didn't give them really any questions prior to this. I've just been winging things at them. So they've done incredibly well. And yeah, just massive thank you to you guys. A big thank you, of course, as well to AFSC for sponsoring this. And I really appreciate everyone who took the time to join us today. It's, we're working on changing the culture where we're, open about mental health and we're empowered to take care of our mental wellness. And that literally is one conversation at a time. So I appreciate everyone joining. If you can leave with two things: one, it's put your own oxygen mask on first, and two, check in with people and have real conversations. Thank you all. Happy Canada's Egg Day.